75% of parents admit that having a child is significantly more expensive than they thought, and 37% admit they actually had no clue how much it would cost to have a child before they started. And almost half of all parents, 46%, are either draining their savings or going into debt just to cover childcare costs so that they can go back to work. My name's Christina Spark. Welcome to the My Family Strategist podcast. As a former chartered accountant with a background in strategy, I love research. I love making data-backed, informed decisions. So when I was making the decision whether or not to have a child, I did all the research to find out how expensive it would be. And let me tell you, the figures online were gross underestimates. I just Googled it now, and it says in the first year of life, expect to spend between $3,000 to $13,000 on a child. Well, I have gone back and audited the first year of life with my son, and guess how much it cost me to have a child in Sydney, Australia? Over $200,000. Here's the problem. 90% of people, including the internet, is actually just focused on some of the smaller expenditures, like the baby gear, the stuff. But if you focus there, you are missing the big financial picture. It is not the stuff. It is the structural changes that occur when you become a parent. Things like taking unpaid parental leave, the impact to the career, particularly mothers long term, your housing costs, cars, big structural changes that you have to go through when you become a parent that you just can't really even fathom when you're child-free. 82% of mothers and 76% of fathers say they constantly worry about their family's financial stability. So it all just makes sense when you think about this. You go in having no clue or grossly underestimating how much it costs to have a child. Several years later, you're asking yourself, why do I feel behind? What did I do wrong? And I hope that this actually validates you if you are a parent who's already been through it and you're finding yourself not in the financial situation you thought you should be in at this age, that if you chose this path of having children, as wonderful and joyous as it is, it's going to have a big financial impact. And that's why I've created this podcast. It's all about smart financial strategy for modern parents, for parents who are now dealing with fear and anxiety when it comes to their family finances. This episode is for anybody who is thinking about family planning. If you know anyone who is considering having a child, who wants to be financially prepared, please share this episode. It contains the most accurate information when it comes to a realistic number on how much does it actually cost to have a child. It is possible to not have a car and to take the bus every day with your pram and your baby. But it's not very realistic, especially if you live in a big sprawling city that doesn't have great public transportation. It is possible, sure, to squeeze 4 people in a 1-bedroom apartment with your 2 dogs and a cat. That's not really what I'm talking about here. This is a more realistic and accurate picture of a typical family that lives in a pretty big, expensive city. How much is it actually going to cost you to have that child? And I'm going to break that down in this episode. It's actually part of a YouTube video that I filmed 6 months ago that I'm going to reintroduce here for my podcast. I did have my son in 2024, but guess what? The numbers have not gone down from then. Here we are in 2026. They've actually just intensified. So here is exactly how that $200K breaks down. Now, before we jump into the episode, I do want to share just an important note and disclaimer. I'm a former chartered accountant and I love a good spreadsheet, but I'm not your financial advisor. The numbers and strategies I'm sharing today are based on my personal journey and general research for 2026. This is not personal, financial, tax, or legal advice. Every family's numbers are different, so please consult with a licensed professional before making any big moves based on what you hear today.
So the first phase I'm going to talk through is the conception phase. That's right. You may start incurring expenses before you're even pregnant. And I think a lot of people don't factor this in because, of course, we all want to be optimistic and assume we'll have a really straightforward path. But 1 in 6 people do require fertility treatment. So it is potentially a large cost. My journey started 5 years before I had my son while in the US. So where relevant, I have highlighted both in US dollars and Australian dollars. I decided to freeze my embryos, and I did that because I knew I wanted to delay having children until my late 30s. And it was a bit of an insurance policy For that, I did 2 rounds of embryo freezing, 2 rounds because the first round was not very successful. And that cost 60,000 US dollars. However, my employer covered that expense for me. I was very fortunate to have that benefit. More and more employers are providing this. So that was a big savings for us. However, what we did have to pay for is all the storage fees that are annual and also increase over time. I paid for roughly 3 years of storage, which equates to 5,400 Australian dollars. The other thing is when the time came to actually try and have a child, we did conceive naturally. So I didn't actually use those embryos. There were other expenses I incurred, small things, but still a few $100s, prenatal vitamins, ovulation strips. I used apps to track my cycle. So my total out-of-pocket cost for the conception phase, 5,700 Australian dollars. If you were to pursue IVF in Australia, the cost really ranges between 4,000 to 20,000 per cycle because we do have a private and a public healthcare system. However, it can be really expensive because on average, people need about 3 transfers. So that can be a large expense. Adoption is also not free. Definitely. There are a lot of fees associated with the adoption agency fees, travel fees, legal fees, things like that. So that can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. All right. So the next phase is the pregnancy and birth phase. And so the largest expense in this category is going to be medical. I chose to go through the private system route because I felt the benefit outweighed the costs, but it was significantly more expensive. I paid 5,150 Australian dollars for my obstetrician. I paid about $1,000 in scans and tests, and I paid $2,300 at my birth, which covered my anesthetist, the pediatrician, and the birth assistant. So that is a total of 8,450 Australian dollars. If you do choose the public route, you will still have to cover things like the scans and tests, but everything else is pretty much free. Now are some of the non-medical costs, but actually a lot of these probably fall in the necessary medical bucket. I'll start with prenatal classes. So these are things like birth class and first aid course for babies. I spent about $750 just between a few different classes that I wanted to take. Some were exceptional, some were a waste of time, but hey, what are you going to do? And the next category is pelvic floor physio. They usually charge about $100 per session. A lot of this was covered through my private health insurance, but I did have to pay some amount of out of pocket. It was a roughly $400 for physiotherapy costs. I also saw a therapist who specialized in prenatal mental health. And I found that to be a very worthwhile investment in my own mental health. I was spent about $1,000 across the various sessions. It was partly covered by Medicare, but that was my total out of pocket for that phase. The next category is maternity essentials. These are things like maternity clothes, maternity pillow that helped me sleep at night, support band that was a few $100s to alleviate some back pain. So I spent about $1,500 in terms of maternity essentials. And the last category I'll include here is the baby showers. I had something extremely casual. I hosted it in my own backyard with 35 guests, and I paid about $800 for food and drinks. Of course, it can be significantly more expensive if you choose to go to a nice venue. So my total out-of-pocket cost for the stage of pregnancy and birth was 12,900 Australian dollars. So if I add the 5,700 I incurred in the conception phase, that brings me to a total of $18,600 before I've even held my own baby. And if you haven't noticed, I haven't even covered any of the baby stuff. So let's get into that now. Okay, we've made it to year 1. Baby arrives. Congratulations. This is where the expenses truly ramp up. So let's start with all of those baby items. This is things like the pram, your baby's bassinet. These are really big ticket items. They're a few $100s each, even up to a few $1,000s, depending on what you choose. I went through my own expenses and registry, and I spent $10,300 on baby items. And this was, again, just the sort of get started year 1 pack. I also purchased some secondhand items, but yeah, the cost was about $10,300 for everything. And I don't feel like I wasted money necessarily. I don't think there were a lot of items I didn't end up using because I was really well researched in what I wanted. So it just is a lot of expensive stuff. However, because I did have a baby shower and I have wonderful, generous friends and family, I received quite a bit in gifts. And then there's also quite good resale on baby items. That's good to estimate the resale value as well. So I'm going to say that my net out of pocket, tried to do this as accurately as possible, was $3,600. The next category is even more significant, and it is the lifestyle category. So these are the expenses that not many people factor in, but can be very significant. So the first cost I'll include is the car upgrade. We only had one vehicle. And so when baby came along, we realized we were going to need a second, given that I was staying at home on maternity leave and my husband was still having to commute to work. So we did opt for an SUV. I incurred about $1,000 per month in terms of the lease payment. The next cost in the lifestyle category is the housing upgrade. So if you take myself and my husband as an example, we used to rent a 1-bedroom apartment and that suited us really well when we were child free. And now that we have a family, we decided to purchase a home with a backyard. I don't believe we would have purchased a house this large if we chose to be child free. So I would estimate a portion of that incremental housing cost to be attributed to having a child. And that would be about $2,000 per month or $24,000 per year in terms of housing. So as another example, let's say you're renting a 2-bedroom apartment now and you want to get a 3-bedroom apartment for when your baby comes. That's the difference of about $100 a week in terms of rent on average. And that adds up to about $5,000 per year. The next cost I'm going to share is likely one of your largest costs and also one frequently overlooked. It is the lost wages of the primary care who is going to take parental leave. So this is the opportunity cost of not working. So this, of course, is going to vary very much based on your own salaries, as well as what your parental leave policy is, if you are lucky enough to get one. I received actually quite a generous parental leave policy of 6 months paid, and I chose to take 6 months unpaid. So the lost wages after tax that I lost was 143,000 Australian dollars. The next category of expense is childcare and household support. A lot of people are really lucky to get family help, but you might find yourself that you need more help than your family is able to provide, or you may not have any family close by, like my situation. I have to say, of all the expenses, this is the one that was the most worthwhile. I got a postpartum doula to help me out for 3 months. She only came once or twice a week for a few hours, and it was so I could do things like sleep and have a shower. And I spent 3,500 Australian dollars for that. We decided to get a housekeeper to help out with things like cooking, cleaning, and laundry. So come once a week for a few hours. I pay $180 per week for this. So we spend $9,360 per year for that support. The next expense is baby medical. We really were lucky that we had a healthy baby that did not have any medical complications. So I'm really just factoring in a few typical checkups from our GP and our pediatrician. And what we spent in year one was $1,380. The next category is an increase in household consumables. So these are things you might expect, like the cost of nappies and wipes, baby formula. That can be about $1,000 per year on average. But it's also things like the increase in water usage and electricity that people don't often factor in. So for an example, I used to do laundry once a week. Somehow I have to do laundry every day, and there's an always constant pile. So my laundry costs have gone up 7x per week, and it's an increase in water, it's an increase in electricity, it's an increase in laundry detergent. So I would estimate that this category is roughly $2,000 per year in terms of household consumables. Now, the last category of expense is entertainment. It's obviously optional, but I really enjoyed taking my baby to baby sensory classes and meeting up with my mother's group and going for lunch and baby swimming lessons. I just found that was really worthwhile for my mental health mainly. So I spent about $1,700 in the entertainment category in the first year. So lastly, I do want to incorporate savings because I want to make this as accurate as possible. And there were some lifestyle savings. These are things like eating and dining out, travel, and other discretionary things. I think it's fair to assume that I saved about $150 per week, mainly in the dining and eating out. But over the course of the year, I estimate that we saved 7,800 Australian dollars just in discretionary spending. So my total out of pocket in the first year of my baby's life, net of all of the savings, was just over $192,000. Now, if I add in the costs incurred in the conception phase as well as pregnancy and birth, that brings my grand total to just over 211,000 Australian dollars before my baby has even turned one. It's a lot of money.
I've just broken down this huge number, but there's even more things that I did not even include in this analysis. Because we stopped at year one, I did not include childcare. But in Sydney, it's roughly between $160 to $225 per day. My son went to daycare when he turned 1 year old. I started him 4 days a week, and that cost $38,000 per year. I've since reduced his number of days, and then I've been able to decrease my childcare costs. Now, there is a government subsidy, but it depends on your income. If you make over about $535,000 as a family, you're not eligible for anything. And below that, it's a sliding scale. So if you are family planning, definitely go online and check out a childcare subsidy calculator through Centrelink to figure out how much you're eligible for so that you can more accurately plan. I talked about lost wages, but what a lot of people forget is that when you lose your wages from your employer, you also lose the super. In 2026, the gender gap in superannuation is about 25%. Women have 25% less in their super than men because of this exact reason. So in July of 2025, the government made a really positive change and they began paying super on the Commonwealth Paid Parental Leave program. But you have to be eligible for that program in the first place. The Commonwealth Paid Parental Leave benefit is minimum wage for 24 weeks. The total benefit ends up being about $22,700 over the course of the 24 weeks. You have to be earning less than $180,000 to qualify. But if you do not qualify based on the individual test, you could look at the family income test. If your family makes under $350,000, then you still qualify for this. The frustrating thing about this one is that it is a hard cutoff. If you make even $1 above those limits, you don't get anything. The other thing I didn't include, because we just looked at year one, was more the ongoing career impact, primarily to mothers or the primary carers, when you do remove yourself from the workforce because you're focusing on family. Treasury data, which was updated in 2026, shows mothers' earnings fall by an average of 55% over the first 5 years. Now, if you add the super impact to that, the compound interest that is lost, that's a massive financial difference by the time you're 65. And it's not just taking time off. 82% of mothers in Australia go back to work part-time, and you miss out on things like promotions and the compounding salary growth that you would otherwise get if you were full-time. And of course, I did not include education. If you go the private route, this is going to be one of the largest expenses that you're going to incur. And I looked at private school versus the public school system. I looked at the research and ran the numbers to really answer the question, is private school worth it? So if you want to check out that episode, please feel free to check it out in My Family Strategist podcast. So in conclusion, if you are planning for a child, especially your very first child, if you know someone that is, don't lose the big financial picture. Don't stress about the $200 high chair that you bought. Don't stress about the little things. What's going to actually move the needle in your family finances is to better plan for those big structural changes. And those are primarily things like childcare, housing upgrades, buying a second car, lost wages, and impact on career. Those are the big things to be way more mindful of and ensure that you consider as you're financially planning. And you might be able to creatively think of ways that you can minimize some of those structural changes. For example, I made an entire video that looked at childcare in Australia in 2026. I broke down every model from nannies to au pairs to daycares, preschool, stay-at-home parents, and I looked at the financial impact of each as well as pros and cons. One thing I did not include is the nonprofit council-run daycares that are a small minority because we primarily do have a for-profit model here in Australia. So they're difficult to find and they also have really reduced hours, but they are a good option if you are a parent that has a little bit of flexibility. So myself, I recently made a change. My child was in a for-profit, full-service daycare, the ones that operate from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I decided to withdraw him only 1 day a week to a nonprofit center. It's smaller, the hours are crappy, It's like 8:30 till 4. I have to pack his lunch. It's not as convenient, but because I have additional flexibility, I calculated that I would save $5,000 a year just by switching one day. And then the other 2 days of the week that he's in care, I can still benefit from the convenience of a full service center. The other move that I made is I've withdrawn him from care on Mondays. Why did I do this? Most public holidays fall on a Monday. And in a for-profit daycare, they're going to charge you for public holidays. So by removing Monday from my childcare schedule, I'm saving roughly $700 over the year just by avoiding that day. Lots of for-profit centers actually don't let you do that. You usually have to choose either a Monday or a Friday. But if you have the flexibility, if you're able to find out, maybe that could be a strategy to reduce your cost. The next big one is housing. How can you think more strategically about making a smart housing choice? Before you go and upsize, check out the episode I did on rent versus buy in Australia, where I go through all the unique benefits and drawbacks of both renting and buying a family home. And this is specifically tailor-made for parents. We talk about things like school zones and flexibility, all the way to some of the tax benefits and financial benefits that you get when you are a homeowner. Get more information as opposed to less when you're making these big financial decisions. It will set you up so much better for the rest of your life. And then my other takeaway is not about saving money. It's about spending money. It's about unapologetically spending money on the things that you value. What I value most, especially in this phase of life that I'm in with a young child, it's time with my son, it's my marriage, and it's my mental and physical health. And I will spend lots of money if it improves those three things. And the one thing that always improves all three things is help. I invested in help. It improved my marriage. It improved the relationship with my husband and my son, as well as my mental health. And those things cost money. I spend about $1,000 a month on help, on cleaning, on cooking, on housekeeping. And I'm happy to spend that money, and I am happy to save money elsewhere. I'm okay not going out drinking and eating out. I'm okay skipping a lot of the social things I used to do when I was child-free. I'm even happy to go on less holidays and buy less nice clothes and less stuff, but do not take away my village. That to me is what I value. And so it's a reallocation of your resources in a way that aligns with your values. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow me at My Family Strategist to get notified when future episodes drop. Stay tuned for more great financial strategies for parents. Have a great day.